Hi everyone, I'm here to do a project share with you. This journal is going to be available in my Etsy shop, and it is made from some of these beautiful 1930s, 1940s wallpapers. So let me show you. I got these beautiful papers from I've forgotten the name of the shop. I'm going to link her below in the description box. It's Ruby and Pearl XO on Etsy. She has gorgeous vintage wallpapers. And so these are just some of them that she has available. So I've got a whole collection of these, and I just pulled out a few of them. I just thought some of you might be interested. And so what I've done is created a journal. And I think what I'm going to do, this is going to be available in my shop. And then I'm going to do some of the papers that I've just shown you, but I'm not going to have them made ahead of time. As you can imagine, I don't want to use them and have them all cut up, and if they're not purchased, then I just feel like I'm almost wasting the paper if they're not going to be used. So I'm going to list them in my shop, but they will be journals that I will make once they are ordered. So they will take a couple of weeks to get mailed out. However, let me show you what I've made here. So this is Traveler's Notebook size, standard size. So it's 4 1/4 by 8 1/4. And as I mentioned, on the front is some vintage wallpaper. And I've sewn around it, and on the back I've got some player piano paper. Again, I've sewn around it, and then I've just tied it up with a little bit of twine here, just because I thought it went with kind of that old kind of retro vibe, vintage vibe, I guess. So what I've done, I've created a pocket on the front, and I've even used a little bit of the banding on the side, the identification banding. And this is some vintage music paper, and a little bit of vintage trim here, and that's just some newer trim. But isn't this, I mean, this wallpaper is just gorgeous. I just love it. In the front, in the pocket, I have a vintage postcard here, and then a little tag made out of some of the other wallpaper that I have. And then this is just an embossed piece of craft paper, and I've just added a little bit of trim to the top and some journaling space on the back. So let me show you this. Now I have left the front and back inside covers plain. I thought you could add whatever you want if you purchase this. And then I've got a variety of real vintage papers, as well as just some coffee dyed paper throughout, and of course my usual trims and tuck spots and so on. So this is a vintage page. Let me show you, and I have used some of my rusty paper clips again, and this is the full sheet, and then I have a vintage photograph, and I think that lady is holding a cat actually, but it's pretty old. You can see the old car in the background, and then this vintage French receipt, and a little bit of the wallpaper I've just cut a tag out of, just a ruffle here and a bulb pin with some beads on it. A little bit of stamping. I've added a vintage envelope that I've just cut on the top and bottom to create a page. And then I have clipped one of my envelopes, long envelopes, that I've added a wallpaper pocket to. And then I've just added a coffee dyed tag there. This is some music paper, a vintage French. You can see a vintage French kind of list sheet. I get a lot of my vintage French items from Monahan Papers on Etsy. And a bag with floral image, and this is some vintage trim, actually, if I can show you, if I can find it. It's from it's from the edge of anyway, I can't find it. From the edge of a dresser scarf, a vintage dresser scarf, and that my grandmother would have done that. So I've added that. Some craft paper, and that is a vintage French calling card and a railway ticket. This is just some coffee dyed scrapbooking paper. And again, that's some vintage embroidery from a dresser scarf. I have this printable, and then I have a vintage envelope, and it is French, and I do have the letter further on in the journal. Another vintage French receipt, and this is some vintage ledger paper and a coffee dyed doily. A really pretty ruffle here. And then in the center of the signature, I've added the same wallpaper that I used on the cover. I've got 2 pockets here, and then I've got a vintage envelope in the middle, and that is just held shut very simply by that little band that I've cut. And in this pocket I have, that's a vintage recipe and a telephone message pad, and then I've just added a few little sheets of paper here, and I've tied it together with just some vintage ledger there. On this side, this is a printable, and I've honestly forgotten the shop. This is Graphics Fairy, and this is Graphics Fairy as well. On this side, so this is just some coffee dyed paper, and it's just a fold out. This is another piece of vintage French ephemera, and then this is just a printable that I had, and this is a fun printable. I've got a couple of these really kind of 1940s cosmetic advertisements. And here I've just added a little ruffle, and I have on this side a vintage playing card, and then this is the letter that goes with that envelope that you saw further up. I thought that was a nice little piece of ephemera to include. And then this is a flip out page as well. So lots of room, as I always leave, for journaling and pictures. This is a Tim Holtz photo, a little card that you would add to flowers, and this is Graphics Fairy as well, just a little piece of ephemera I thought was good for journaling. And a little ruffle on the other part of that bag, and this is another of those vintage cosmetic advertisements, and I got those from Little Pink Studios on Etsy. She has some great printables. And I've left that as a flip out. So this is the other side of that envelope that you saw at the beginning. And I have added a little bit of tracing paper here so that I could make a pocket. I actually don't have anything in it, so I will be putting something in it, but you can see there's a pocket there. And then on the front, I've added some vintage ledger, a little tab, and then I've got a couple of printables here from the Graphics Fairy. And on this side, this is a little bit of crochet trim that I got from a shop called Wishes and Weeds, and she's on Instagram. She does a lot of Instagram sales, so that's where I got that. And then clipped in that pocket, I have another vintage receipt, and this is a little die cut from the Graphics Fairy, and then just a little kind of vintage wallpaper look journaling card. And then this is the other part of that vintage program from the beginning. And that's the back. So this is kind of the the show and tell for my new little collection of vintage wallpaper covered journals. And I will be listing this in my shop. Once this video is up on my YouTube channel, this will be listed in my shop. And then you'll also see listings for some of these papers as well, for covers. So if there's one you particularly like, check it out. This is more peach, and this one is more pink. Unfortunately, I don't have any more of this particular wallpaper, which I love. I wished I had more. But any of the journals will be very similar to this. Of course, they're going to have different inserts. The vintage inserts that I've included are just one of a kind, so I won't be able to include those, but I will do something very similar, and there'll be the same number of pages and so on. So anyway, thanks for joining me today. I hope you like this, and if you do like the journal, then come on over to my Etsy shop. I've got the link below, and see if there is another paper that you would be interested in. Thanks for joining me, everyone.